finished writing. Malik Rivers was 38 years old. He believed one thing above everything else. A man's word, once given, should never need checking. He built his whole life on that belief. 7 years of marriage, a consulting firm with his name quietly behind half the skyline of West Midtown. A wife he trusted enough to never once look through her phone. That belief held, right up until 10:42 on a Friday morning in October. Terminal B, Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. A single text from Delta changed the rest of his year. Flight 2247 to Chicago, canceled. He had no idea the cancellation wasn't bad luck. It was the only reason he'd be home 4 hours early. And home 4 hours early was exactly when the truth he wasn't looking for would walk right past his front gate. Somewhere in Alpharetta, Georgia, a black Range Rover with West Side dealer plates was about to pull into his driveway, into his spot. And the woman pouring 2 cups of coffee in his kitchen had no idea her husband's flight had been grounded by weather. She thought she had until 6 o'clock. She was wrong. By 4 hours and 11 minutes. If you've ever felt that quiet sinking sense that something was wrong long before you had proof, stay with me. What Malik found in that driveway was only the first of 8 things that would unravel, one by one, over the next 90 days. The last one wasn't evidence at all. It was a letter, written by Amara's own mother, years before the wedding, telling her exactly how to leave him if he ever stopped being a good man. She never imagined she'd be the one who needed it. It was an ordinary Friday, the kind Malik had lived 100 times before. He drove himself to the airport like always, black travel bag, 1 carry-on, no fuss. He liked routines. Routines were honest. They didn't change on you when you weren't looking. The Westbrook project in Chicago needed him by early afternoon. A developer client, a tight timeline. The kind of trip he could do in his sleep. He sat in the gate area with a black coffee he hadn't touched yet, scrolling through emails, half listening to boarding calls down the hall. Then his phone buzzed. Weather delay. Flight 2247. Canceled. He exhaled, more annoyed than upset. He called his assistant, rescheduled 2 calls, pushed the Chicago meeting to Monday. Done in under 10 minutes. That was Malik, calm under pressure, methodical. The kind of man who never raised his voice because he never needed to. But walking back through the terminal toward the parking deck, something else settled over him. Something smaller than worry, close to it though. 7 years of marriage. He had never once come home early without telling Amara first. He told himself it didn't matter. He'd surprise her. Maybe they'd get an early dinner. The drive north on I-85 took 35 minutes. Light traffic, gray sky. The kind of October morning that smelled like rain before it even started falling. He passed the exit for Haynesbridge Road, turned into the gated entrance of their neighborhood, watched the wrought iron gate roll open the way it always did. That was when he saw it. A Range Rover, black, polished, parked in his spot. Georgia plates. A small decal on the rear windshield, Langston Group. He didn't recognize the car. He didn't recognize the name. He sat there a moment, engine still running, hands on the wheel, rain beating on the windshield. Then, at the edge of the yard, the wooden side gate, the one that led to the back patio, eased shut on its own. Not blown by wind. Closed the way a gate closes when somebody has just walked through it. Malik turned off the engine. He sat in the silence of the car for almost a full minute before he opened the door. Inside, everything sounded normal. A Beyoncé playlist drifted from the kitchen speakers. Amara's perfume, the same Chanel she'd worn since their honeymoon, hung faint in the entryway. Mixed with something underneath it, something like cologne that wasn't his. He set his bag down slowly by the door, walked toward the kitchen. 2 coffee cups sat on the island. One was the yellow-rimmed ceramic mug Amara bought from a little pottery shop in Savannah 2 summers back. A trip he remembered because she'd cried laughing at something a street vendor said. The second cup he had never seen before in his life, still steaming. Whose car is parked in his driveway right now? And why does his wife already have an answer ready before he even asks the question? Find out what Malik discovered next. That night, the house in Oak Park sat quiet, the way it always did. Porch swing creaking faint in the wind. A sound it had made so long, Barron used to joke it got left on by mistake from the Eisenhower administration. Asma slept sound beside him, untroubled, breathing slow and even, like a woman with nothing on her conscience. Barron lay awake past 1 in the morning, stared at the ceiling, replayed that one word over and over. Husband. Said so plain, so casual, like it was nothing at all. When he was sure she wouldn't stir, he slipped out of bed. Her home office sat at the end of the hall, door always half open, never locked. Why would it need to be? 15 years of trust doesn't ask for locks. He sat at her desk, opened the laptop. The password prompt blinked at him in the dark. Their wedding date. He typed it without thinking. First try. His hands stayed steady, which surprised him. He braced for the shaking from the car. But something in him had already shifted. Heartbreak into something colder. Something more deliberate. Evidence gathering. The same instinct that made him good at his job. Find the discrepancy. Follow the number. Don't stop till the ledger balances. He opened her calendar. Mostly ordinary. Board meetings, quarterly reviews, dinner with the Hendersons. Then, buried 3 years back in a folder he almost scrolled past, something strange. X. Private dinner. Do not move. He clicked it. One line written in Ozma's own clipped hand. Barron won't ask because he trusts me when I say I'm working late. He read it twice, a third time, like rereading it might change the words. It didn't. 3 years, not 3 weeks, not a slip in a weak moment. 3 years of careful, deliberate hiding, written down like a business memo. He closed the laptop gentle, the way you close something you don't want to wake up. Sat in the dark a long while, listening to his own breath. He thought of their first apartment, a cramped 1-bedroom in Logan Square, back when Asma was still climbing the ladder at a smaller logistics firm, and money was tight enough they split a rotisserie chicken 3 ways. She used to leave notes on the bathroom mirror in dry erase marker. Proud of you on the mornings he had a big presentation. Come straight home on the nights she missed him. He hadn't thought of those notes in years. He thought about them now, sitting in the dark of her office, wondering exactly when they stopped, wondering if he'd just failed to notice. Next morning, after Asma left for work, he went to her jewelry drawer, told himself he didn't know what he was looking for. That wasn't true. He found it tucked under a velvet ring box. A single brass key, unmarked, attached to a worn gem access card, faded so bad he could barely read the logo. Not new. Carried a long time. He drove to River North that afternoon. The key sat on the passenger seat like it might burn through the upholstery. Apartment 214 wasn't hard to find. The key turned smooth in the lock, like it had turned there 100 times before. Not a hideout. That hit him first. A home. Furnished. Lived in. A throw blanket folded over the couch the way Asma always folded blankets, corner to corner. Never tossed. On the counter, a small ceramic bowl, the kind people drop change and grocery lists in. Inside, a folded list in her handwriting, dated barely a week back. Milk, coffee filters, Xavier's blood pressure medication. That ordinariness hit him harder than the photographs would. This wasn't stolen weekends, Somebody had been buying groceries here. On the wall, framed photos. Asma laughing on a beach he recognized as Oak Street. Asma and Xavier at Starved Rock, his arm round her waist, her head tipped back in a laugh he hadn't heard pointed at him in years. In every photo, her wedding ring was missing. Then he saw the necklace. One photo, a summer or two back, Asma wearing a delicate gold chain, small sapphire pendant. His stomach dropped. He'd given her that necklace for their 12th anniversary. Stood in a jewelry store on Michigan Avenue, asked the saleswoman 3 times if it was elegant enough. Wanted it perfect. She wore it to dinner that night, told him it was the most beautiful thing anyone ever gave her. And here it sat, photographed round her neck in another man's apartment, like a trophy she didn't even bother taking off. He opened the closet. Her clothes hung beside Xavier's. 2 mugs dried by the sink, small, domestic, told him more than any photo could. This wasn't an affair tucked into stolen afternoons. This was a second marriage, hiding in plain sight 20 minutes from his front door. On the desk, a manila folder. Future plans. Inside, a printed timeline. Dates, milestones. One line near the bottom. Begin trying for children with Xavier once everything is stable. Barron sat down hard on the edge of a bed that wasn't his. He pulled up the banking app, hands finally starting to shake. Searched the joint account. A recurring transfer, labeled family support, going out every month for over 2 years. He'd always figured it went to Asma's elderly aunt in Memphis. It didn't. A woman in Atlanta. Xavier's mother. He sank to the floor, back against the bed frame, phone gripped so tight his knuckles ached. That's when it rang. Keisha. "Brother." His sister's voice came strange, careful, like she was picking her way across ice. "There's something I've wanted to tell you, for a long time. I didn't know if I should, because of Asma." She stopped herself, changed the subject, asked about Thanksgiving plans of all things, voice too bright, too fast. Barron barely heard her, still staring at the necklace glowing on his screen, too full of his own betrayal to catch the weight under his sister's words. A second secret, waiting beneath the first. He photographed everything before he left, every document, every angle of every room. By the time he stepped back onto the street, it was past 3 in the morning. Rain started falling over the Chicago River. Cold, steady, the kind that doesn't ask permission, just comes. Barron thought he had the whole truth that night. He had no idea his own sister had been carrying a piece of it for 2 long years. Or what she'd finally do with it, held once through his nose. "Are you okay?" Kendrick asked. Quiet. Malik stood, buttoned his suit jacket with steady hands. "I'm fine." He picked up the folder, tucked it under his arm. At the door, Kendrick said one more thing. Quiet. The kind of thing only a friend who'd watched this exact pattern play out before would know to say. "Some people don't do this because they hate the person across from them, Malik. They do it because somewhere along the way, they got convinced you'd never actually leave." Malik paused, hand on the doorframe. He didn't answer, just nodded once. The words stayed with him longer than he expected. "Call Aisha Okoro for me," he said. "Today." Kendrick nodded and reached for his phone, already knowing, the way only an old friend could, that the quietest man in the room was about to become the most dangerous one in it. If you found Malik's folder, what would you do? Confront her that same night, or stay quiet and let the lawyer speak first like he did? Comment yes if you'd wait. Comment no if you'd confront her on the spot. Amara never knew the last quiet dinner of her marriage was also its execution. Tuesday night, Malik lit the candles himself. The tall ivory ones she kept in the dining room hutch for occasions she deemed worthy. He opened a bottle of the Cabernet she liked, poured 2 glasses, set the table the way he had 100 times before. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than a husband being thoughtful on an ordinary Tuesday. From the inside, it was the calm a man builds right before he tells the truth. Amara talked through most of the meal. A new client meeting, a fabric order delayed out of High Point, a complaint about her assistant forgetting to confirm a vendor. Malik listened the way he always listened, asked the right follow-up questions, refilled her glass when it ran low. Not a single muscle in his face betrayed the manila folder sitting closed in his study 20 feet away, waiting. If you've ever sat across a table from someone and realized you were having 2 completely different conversations at once, one out loud, one only in your own head, you already know exactly what that dinner felt like for Malik. When the plates were cleared and the candles had burned down an inch, Malik rose without a word, walked to his study, came back holding the folder, set it down gently on the kitchen island, right beside the spot where, just 4 days earlier, a steaming cup of coffee that wasn't hers had been sitting in the exact same place. "Read it," he said simply. Amara's eyes moved from his face to the folder and back again. Something in his tone, too calm, too even, made her hands hesitate before she finally reached for it. She opened it slowly. The bank statements first. Her breath caught, barely audible. But Malik heard it. The property deed next. Her hand began to tremble. Not dramatically, just a small, involuntary shake at the edge of the page. Notice that. Her hands were shaking before a single word came out of her mouth. That's the body keeping score. The nervous system reacting to exposure faster than the mind can find any words for it at all. Fear arrives first. Conscience, if it arrives, comes later. Then the emails, the forwarded timelines, the client information. Her own name in the from field, sent to an address that wasn't his. She didn't gasp, didn't drop the folder. She went very still, the way people go still right before they cry. For a long moment, the only sound in the kitchen was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the rain that had started again outside, tapping soft against the window over the sink. "How long have you known?" she asked finally, her voice smaller than Malik had ever heard it. Worth pausing on that question. It tells you almost everything about where Amara's heart actually was in that moment. She didn't ask, "Can we fix this?" She didn't ask, "Are you okay?" She asked, "How long?" Because some part of her was still trying to map the damage, still calculating what could be salvaged and what couldn't. Not cruelty, instinct. When people are caught, the mind often goes straight to triage before it ever gets to grief. Malik didn't answer right away. He walked to the window instead, looked out at the dark, wet shape of the backyard, rain still beating on the patio furniture below. "Since I realized," he said slowly, "you didn't just betray me. You betrayed everything I was building for us." Amara's eyes filled. Her hands came up to cover her mouth. When the first sob broke loose, it wasn't soft. It came from somewhere deep, somewhere that had been holding itself together by sheer performance for months. But Malik knew his wife. He'd spent 7 years learning the difference between Amara's real tears and Amara's useful ones. Watching her now, shoulders shaking over the kitchen island, he understood with a kind of quiet, aching clarity that these tears weren't for him. Worth naming clearly, because so many people confuse the two. There's a real difference between guilt and shame. Guilt sounds like, "I did something terrible and I need to make it right." Shame sounds like, "I've been seen and now I have to survive being seen." Guilt looks outward, toward the person who was hurt. Shame looks inward toward self-preservation. What Malik was watching wasn't guilt. It was Amara grieving the loss of control over her own story. The moment a carefully managed double life collapsed into something she could no longer narrate on her own terms. She wasn't crying because she was sorry. She was crying because she'd lost control of the story. Aisha Okoro will be in touch by the end of the week, Malik said, voice steady, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. You have 90 days. I want this handled cleanly. You can't do this to me, Amara whispered, the words barely making it past her hands. Malik turned his back to her then, faced the dark window. His own reflection ghosted faintly over the rain-streaked glass. You've been doing this to me, he said quietly, for a very long time. Neither of them said anything else for a while. Amara sat at the island, folder open in front of her, staring at her own handwriting on a deed she'd signed in a name she hadn't used since before their wedding. Malik stood at the window, arms crossed loosely, watching the rain instead of watching her. Giving her, out of some old habit of decency he couldn't quite let go of, a moment to fall apart without an audience. There's something psychologists call ambiguous loss. Worth naming here because it explains exactly what Malik was carrying in that silence. It's the particular kind of grief that comes from losing someone who is still standing right in front of you, still breathing, still speaking, close enough to touch, and yet already gone in every way that matters. No funeral for that kind of loss, no casserole on the porch, no friends bringing covered dishes, no one saying the right words because there's no clear event to mourn. Malik wasn't only angry that night, he was grieving a woman standing 8 feet away from him in her own kitchen. And there was nowhere to put that grief except into the quiet, steady decisions he made next. When she finally spoke again, her voice had changed. The performance was gone. What was left underneath sounded almost like a stranger. My mother always said, she started, then stopped herself, shook her head, couldn't finish. Malik didn't ask her to finish it, not that night. There would be time later for the things she almost said and didn't. Things that would eventually surface on their own, in their own time, in ways neither of them could have predicted that evening in the kitchen. For now, there was only the folder, the rain, and the long, careful silence of a man who had already decided he would not raise his voice tonight, no matter what she said next. He'd spent 10 months collecting proof so that when this moment finally came, he wouldn't need to argue with her. The evidence would speak for itself. The way it was speaking now, laid out plainly on the same counter where she used to leave him notes about dinner plans and dry cleaning. Amara closed the folder at last, very gently, as if closing it quietly might undo what was written inside. Is there anything I can say? She asked. Malik finally turned to look at her. Really look at her. The way he hadn't let himself in weeks. Studying the face he'd loved across 7 years of mornings and arguments and ordinary Tuesdays just like this one. Before tonight. Not tonight, he said. Maybe not ever. But I'd rather you save it for someone who hasn't already seen the paperwork. He picked up the folder, tucked it under his arm, walked upstairs to the guest room without looking back. Behind him, in the kitchen, the candles burned another half-inch before Amara finally found the strength to blow them out. 2 days passed in a strange, suspended quiet. Barron stayed at a hotel near Lakeview, not ready to go home, not ready to do much of anything except sit by the window and watch the lake change color with the weather. Second evening, his sister called, asked if she could come by. Same careful, ice-walking tone from before. Except this time, no turning back to small talk about Thanksgiving. Keisha showed up a little after 7, still in her work clothes from the school where she counseled kids all day. helping other people's children carry their burdens. Stood in the hotel doorway holding her purse with both hands, like she needed something to hold on to. In her palm, when she finally opened it, a small silver USB drive. "I need to tell you something," she said, before he'd even closed the door. "And I need you to let me get through it. Because if you stop me, I don't know if I can start again." Baron nodded slow, sat down across from her. "I've known for 2 years." Her voice shook on the last word, then steadied, forced itself steady. "I saw them together, at a fundraiser in Hyde Park, almost exactly 2 years ago. Ozma and Xavier, standing too close, talking too easy, the way people talk when they've stopped being careful around each other. I took pictures. I don't even know why. Instinct, maybe. Something in me already knew." She slid the drive across the table. "There's more on there than pictures." Baron plugged it in, hands gone cold and unsteady all at once. Photographs first. Ozma and Xavier at the fundraiser, exactly as she described. His hand at the small of her back in a way no business colleague's hand belongs. Then a few videos, brief, grainy, shot from a careful distance. "I wasn't trying to record anything," Keisha said quiet, before he could ask. "I was filming clips for the school's auction page. We always needed footage from those events. I was near the dessert table when I heard them. Low voices by the windows. My phone just happened to still be running. I didn't even realize what I'd caught till I got home and played it back that night." At the bottom of the folder, a single audio file. 47 seconds. Keisha's hand trembled as she reached over and pressed play. Ozma's voice came through the laptop speakers, clear, unmistakable. Light, almost amused, in a way that turned Baron's stomach. "Baron will never suspect anything. He trusts too much. That's his greatest weakness." 47 seconds. That's all it took to turn his whole marriage into something he didn't recognize. Not a love that quietly died. A long con that had simply been allowed to run. There's something particular about hearing a sentence like that. Different even from catching someone in the act. Seeing betrayal hurts you. But hearing yourself described as a weakness, hearing your own trust turned into the punchline of someone else's plan, that reaches a different place. Psychologists who study betrayal call this the deepest wound there is. It isn't only about what was done to you. It's discovering that the very thing you gave freely, your faith in another person, got studied, measured, used against you on purpose. That kind of injury doesn't just break a heart. It makes a person wonder if trusting anyone ever again is safe. Something in Baron's chest seized and didn't let go. He stayed where he was, eyes fixed on the screen long after the audio finished. Tears ran down his face. He didn't move to wipe them. Just let them fall, the way rain falls. Without asking permission, without apology. Keisha broke first. Face in her hands, sobbing, shoulders shaking with 2 years of held breath finally let go. "I didn't have the courage to tell you," she said between gasps. "I was scared, Baron. Scared of breaking up what everybody saw as the perfect family. Our family. You know what people said about you two at church? At the cookouts? Look at Baron and Ozma, the picture of success. I didn't want to be the one who took that away from you. Didn't want people whispering I destroyed it." Her words landed somewhere deeper than Ozma's betrayal ever had. Because Ozma's lie was about love. Keisha's silence was about fear. Fear of a community's judgment. Fear of being the one who cracked the image everyone had built around them, brick by careful brick, for 15 years. Maybe it helps to understand why a good person, and Keisha was a good person, the kind who spent her days helping kids carry their hardest feelings, can still choose silence over honesty. It rarely comes from not caring. More often, it comes from caring about too many people at once and not knowing how to protect one without seeming to betray the rest. When a family spent years getting praised for looking a certain way, telling the truth starts to feel like its own kind of disloyalty. Even when staying quiet is the thing doing the real damage. Fear dressed up as loyalty looks almost exactly like the real thing, right up until the moment it breaks something it was supposed to protect. And in protecting that image, she'd let her own brother walk blind through 2 more years of a marriage that wasn't real. Barron stood up slow. Keisha flinched for a second, like she expected him to walk out the way he'd walked out on Asma. Instead, he crossed the small distance and pulled his sister into his arms. Neither said anything for a long while. Just stood there, 2 grown siblings holding on to each other in a hotel room over Lake Michigan, crying together for the first time since they were kids. Since long before either of them learned what it cost to keep a family's image polished and whole. Later, when the worst of the crying passed, Barron asked the question sitting underneath everything else. Why now? Why not before? Why not after the anniversary dinners and the barbecues where he'd toasted his own marriage in front of people who already knew the truth? Keisha wiped her face with the back of her hand. Because when you called Richard, I knew the image was already gone. I'd spent 2 years protecting something that had already broken. All I was protecting anymore was my own silence. The most honest thing anyone had said to him in 3 years. There's a kind of relief that only comes from finally saying the thing you've been carrying alone. It doesn't undo the years of holding it in. But it does something almost as important. It gives 2 people permission to grieve the same loss together instead of separately, instead of alone. That's often where real healing quietly starts. Not in the moment the truth comes out. In the moment someone else chooses to stay in the room with you after it does. Next morning, Barron drove to the Cook County Courthouse and filed for divorce. Illinois didn't ask him to prove what Asma had done to end the marriage, only that it was beyond repair, which by then was the simplest true thing he'd said in days. But the documents he'd gathered would matter for what came next. Under Illinois law, a spouse who spends shared money supporting an affair can be made to account for it when everything gets divided. With the transfers, the lease, the calendar entry, all time-stamped, there'd be no room for Asma to argue otherwise. Within the week, the Horizon Dynamics board, armed with everything Barron and Richard compiled, voted to remove Asma as CEO. Xavier was terminated the same afternoon, his office cleared under the watch of 2 security guards he used to joke with easy in the lobby. Richard handled the public statement himself. Careful, measured, cited leadership changes without naming specifics, protecting the stock price more than anyone's reputation. Exactly the way Barron expected. Privately, before the announcement went out, he called just to say one thing. You did the right thing. Most people in your position would have stayed quiet for the comfort of it. Richard later learned, almost as a footnote, that the anonymous email 4 months back came from a mid-level analyst in finance, someone who'd noticed irregular expense routing tied to Xavier's team, but didn't have enough evidence or courage to put a name to the complaint. Small, almost unremarkable in the end, except for what it confirmed. Barron hadn't been the only one paying attention. He'd just been the only one with enough at stake to follow it all the way through. Word moved fast through Chicago business circles, faster through their old church community. People who once called Barron and Asma the picture of a successful black family now traded careful, hushed conversations after Sunday service. The kind of whispers Keisha spent 2 years trying to prevent. Happening anyway. Just delayed. Just rearranged. It's a hard lesson, but a true one. Silence almost never stops a story from coming out. It only decides who gets hurt the most by the time it finally does. Barron felt none of the satisfaction he might have expected. Mostly just tired, hollowed out, quiet in a way that wasn't peace yet, wasn't quite grief anymore either. 2 months later, standing in that courthouse hallway with the final decree in hand, Barron thought this was the end of the story. He had no idea that 2 years later, a message from Xavier himself would arrive and force him to reconsider just how far his wife had been willing to go to protect her secret. The truth had already cost him his marriage. What he didn't know yet was how much further it would still reach. You'll never leave. That single idea, more than any single piece of evidence in the folder, was the real key to everything that had happened in this marriage. Trust, once it's lasted long enough, can quietly turn into something people stop questioning. Almost like gravity. Simply assumed to always be there, holding everything in place without effort. But trust isn't gravity. It's a choice, renewed daily by two people. The moment one person starts treating the other's loyalty as a fixed law of nature rather than a living decision, the door to betrayal doesn't just open, it gets propped open, quietly, for months, sometimes years, until someone finally walks through it. Malik understood now, sitting alone in the dark with the patio furniture still damp from the afternoon rain, that Amara had believed exactly that. She'd built an entire second life on the assumption that his loyalty was bottomless, that no amount of weight would ever make him walk away. She had been wrong, and somewhere upstairs, behind a closed door, she was only now beginning to understand exactly how wrong. The worst of it was over. The folder had been opened, the phone call had landed, and there was nothing left for Amara to deny. But the path from here, through a courthouse, through a sold condo, through one final letter that would explain more than either of them expected, still had to be walked. 90 days, almost to the hour, after the folder had been opened on a kitchen island in Alpharetta, the marriage of Malik and Amara Rivers ended quietly inside a courtroom at the Fulton County Courthouse on Pryor Street. No shouting, no dramatic exchange across the aisle. Aisha Okoro had made sure of that. Every document organized, every figure accounted for, every loose thread of the settlement tied off weeks before either of them ever had to stand in front of a judge. She'd built the settlement around a simple, well-documented argument. 10 months of secret withdrawals and a condo purchased with marital funds hidden under a maiden name counted under Georgia law as dissipation of marital assets. Money spent outside the marriage in anticipation of leaving it without the other spouse's knowledge or consent. Strong enough a case that Amara's own attorney quietly advised her not to fight it. Malik wanted it clean. In the end, that was exactly what he got. The house in Alpharetta stayed with him, the same house with the kitchen island, the same back patio with the wooden gate that had given everything away on an October morning 4 months earlier. The West Midtown condo, the one purchased under a maiden name and meant to be a quiet second life, became part of the settlement instead. Sold off within weeks at a price well below what Amara had paid for it. The fallout outside the courtroom moved just as fast as the fallout inside it. Word travels in Atlanta's design and development circles the way it travels in any tight-knit professional world. Quietly. Then, all at once. 2 of Amara's biggest clients pulled their contracts within the month, citing conflicts of interest in language polite enough to print, but pointed enough that everyone involved understood exactly what it meant. She sold the condo at a loss, substantial enough to require a second conversation with her accountant. Moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment in Decatur, the kind with a single window unit instead of central air. A long way, in every sense, from the gated community on Haynesbridge Road. Xavier Langston's story ended differently, though no less consequentially. In the weeks following her call to Malik, Imani confronted her husband directly. When she finally laid out, in plain terms, exactly what she would do if he didn't end things completely, file for divorce immediately, take their children, make certain every investor and business partner attached to Langston Group heard exactly why, Xavier chose his marriage. Whether out of love or out of fear of losing the life he'd built. No one but Xavier himself would ever really know. Imani didn't need the answer. She only needed the outcome. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, on a quiet Tuesday evening, Malik's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Something made him do it anyway. "It's me," Amara said, her voice soft in a way he hadn't heard since the early years of their marriage. Tired, stripped of performance, almost unfamiliar. "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted to tell you something." Malik said nothing, which was its own kind of permission. "My mother wrote me a letter before we got married," Amara continued. "Years before any of this. She told me that if you ever stopped being a good man, I needed to have a way out already prepared. I kept that letter in the desk drawer at the old house. I never told you about it. I'm not even sure why I'm telling you now." Malik was quiet a long moment, standing in his kitchen, the same island, turning the words over slowly. He thought of all the small, careful decisions Amara had made over the years that had once seemed like ambition, like independence, like a woman simply protecting her own future. He understood now they'd been something else entirely. A plan laid in motion long before he'd ever given her a single real reason to need one. "I wish you peace," he said finally, quiet and even. Then he hung up, didn't ask her anything else. There was nothing left he needed to know from her, directly. That night, after the call, Malik climbed the stairs to what used to be their shared bedroom, opened the bottom drawer of the old desk Amara had used for years to keep her design mood boards and color swatches. The letter wasn't there. Maybe she'd taken it with her weeks earlier, without him ever noticing it was gone. Maybe it had never been in that drawer at all by the time she finally told him about it. But tucked in the back corner, beneath a stack of old fabric samples, sat something he hadn't expected. A small USB drive he barely remembered seeing before. He plugged it into his laptop, almost out of habit more than curiosity. A single folder appeared on the screen, labeled simply Plan B, created, according to the file properties, more than a year before he had ever noticed a strange car in his driveway. Inside, scanned copies of the condo paperwork. Email exchanges with Xavier dated months earlier than even Kendrick's investigation had uncovered. A spreadsheet, carefully maintained, tracking an exit strategy that had been quietly under construction long before Malik had given her any real cause to build one. He thought of Kendrick's note, weeks earlier, scrawled beneath those first surveillance photos. "This doesn't read like somebody who stumbled into something. It reads rehearsed." He hadn't fully understood then just how right his friend had been. He sat there a long while, the cursor blinking over the folder, the cool blue light of the screen the only light in the room. Then, slowly, he unplugged the drive. Placed it back in the drawer, exactly where he'd found it. He didn't delete a single file. He no longer needed the evidence. Because for the first time since the rain had started falling on his driveway 4 months earlier, Malik understood something with complete clarity. He was no longer a character inside Amara's story. He had quietly, deliberately, written himself out of it. The proof was gone from his hands, but never deleted from his memory. And he was finally, fully free of needing either. What Malik built next, in the months that followed, would surprise even the people who knew him best. By the time spring came back to Alpharetta, the house on Haynesbridge Road looked almost nothing like it had the October before. Malik turned the old sunroom, the one that used to hold Amara's fabric samples and color boards, into a reading room. He built the shelves himself over a few quiet weekends, worked through the small frustrations of uneven studs and bracket spacing the way he worked through everything, patiently, one careful measurement at a time. By the time he finished, the room smelled like fresh-cut pine, and the kind of quiet satisfaction that comes from making something with your own two hands. Every object in the house belonged only to him now, not in a bitter way, in a settled way, the way a house feels when it finally stops holding its breath. His work, if anything, grew stronger in the months that followed. Without the quiet drain of a marriage that had become, in the end, more performance than partnership, Malik found he had energy he hadn't realized he'd been spending elsewhere. New clients came, old ones stayed. The Westbrook project, the very deal that had been sending him back and forth to Chicago the morning this all began, closed out as one of the best quarters his firm had seen in years. One evening in early May, he sat across a table from Kendrick and Kendrick's wife at a restaurant in Ponce City Market. Rooftop lights strung up overhead, the Atlanta skyline catching the last of the evening sun. Kendrick raised his glass. "To new chapters," he said. Malik raised his glass too. When he smiled, it was the first real smile anyone had seen on him in months. Not polite, not performed for someone else's comfort, just simple and easy and entirely his own. Somewhere in the months between the courthouse and that rooftop dinner, Malik had come to understand something he hadn't been ready to see back when the wound was still fresh. Amara hadn't only betrayed him. In her own way, she'd also been shaped by something larger than either of them. A generation of women in her family taught that stability mattered more than happiness, that a comfortable marriage was worth protecting, even after it had quietly died from the inside. Her mother's letter, tucked away for years before it was ever needed, hadn't been advice born of cruelty. It had been fear, passed down and dressed up as wisdom, the way fear so often is. Amara had carried that inheritance forward without ever questioning it. And in trying to protect herself from a heartbreak that hadn't even happened yet, she'd created the very heartbreak she'd been warned about. For both of them. And for two other families who never asked to be part of any of it. Malik didn't lose 7 years of his life the way it might have looked from the outside. He came to see it differently. He'd only lost about 10 months. The time it took him to fully realize he'd been holding up a marriage that only one person was still choosing to be in. And once he understood that, he chose himself. Right on time. Not too late the way so many people do. Not out of anger the way some people might have. Quietly, deliberately, with the same calm he brought to every decision that mattered. The story ends the way it should. Not with a courtroom, not with a folder of evidence, but with something far simpler. On a Sunday afternoon that following spring, Malik drove alone on I-85 North, windows down, the warm Atlanta air moving through the car the way it only does in April and May, before the real heat of summer sets in. No one sat in the passenger seat beside him, and for the first time in a very long time, he didn't feel lonely at all. This story teaches us that loyalty deserves witnesses, not just faith. If you've been married 30, 40, 50 years, try this. Every Sunday before church, write one specific thing your husband did for you that week. Not, he's a good man, but he scraped the ice off my windshield before his own. Keep the slips in an old recipe box on the counter. Read them together once a year, out loud, over coffee. And when your grandson visits, don't lecture him about treating a woman right. Let him watch you thank your husband for something small, out loud, at the dinner table. Gratitude spoken plainly teaches him more than any speech ever could. Truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs someone willing to write it down, and someone young enough nearby to notice. Malik Rivers didn't get justice because he fought the loudest. He got it because he never stopped being exactly who he was. And in the end, that was more than enough. These are authentic human stories, shaped by real pain and real dreams. AI helped with grammar, flow, and structure, but the heart, the moral weight, and the life-changing lessons belong entirely to the human creators and their audience. Production team: Story and screenplay by Quinn Fung. Character development and visual conceptualization by Chris Nguyen. Video scripting and scene adaptation by David Nguyen. A passionate team dedicated to bringing this story to life.